I can have this like weird clothes monster thing that's kind of hollow at some points and is always like menacing people with scissors and stuff like that. You know, your imagination's like the limit when it comes to comics.
Hello, bonjour, shalom, and welcome to Culturally Jewish. I'm David Sklar.
And I'm Ilana Zakon.
Join us as we explore Jewish arts, culture, and identity in Canada. On this week's episode, we chat with comic book writer Ari Gross.
Mama always wanted me to be a doctor, but I became an artist and that really shocked her. Now I'm interviewing people in the biz, pros, and newish, but all of them are artists and they're culturally Jewish.
Alana, growing up, did you ever read comic books?
I did.
Oh.
I was like an Archie comics kid, though, not superhero stuff. And I loved reading the comics in the newspaper. That was like my favorite weekend activity. I was not interested in most of the newspaper except for that page.
So, like, what was your favorite one?
Oh my gosh, that's like reaching deep into the recesses of my memory. I remember what they look like. I don't remember the names. I feel like if I saw it, I would 100% remember. But it was all like the classics. I mean, the Far Side was one that's still really funny. Where they have like the one panel kind of parody, dark humor comics. Those ones were ones my mom used to always cut out and put on the fridge. But yeah, how about you, David?
Well, definitely. But I was one of those people who maybe bought a lot of comics, but I didn't necessarily read them. I was kind of obsessed with packaging them, putting them away, thinking like for later on in life, I would make a lot of money off a very like old school X-Men comic or a Spider-Man comic or even a Superman
like
comic.
The comics. You just had them.
I had them, and I was very much being like, I'm going to turn a profit on this in 30, 40 years time. So I definitely read less. Yes, I read a bit of them. I was kind of a big X-Men fan for sure. I watched the show, and Evil Ernie as well too. I don't know if you know about Evil Ernie. That was a big one.
No.
Yeah, so that was like...
I'm not at all involved in the superhero world.
Fair enough. But the reason why I'm asking this is because we're inviting Ari Gross onto the show today, and he just wrote his latest comic series called Wardens.
Mm-hmm.
That takes place in the ward in Toronto in the 1920s, and sort of how the cultures of the Jewish community, the Chinese community, and Black immigrants struggle to survive while fighting the supernatural. And we're going to find out a bit more about what we mean by that, the supernatural. But basically, like we know that all the comics and all the comic book writers of past yore were Jews, right? So it's interesting to sort of reflect and sort of say, what was the influence of these people who were not necessarily religious Jews, but their background being very culturally Jewish? How did that influence comic books of the 40s, 50s, 60s, and of the 21st century?
Yeah, and I'd love to see how that reflects now. We don't have as many Jewish comic book writers they're not the doctors of our community anymore. So curious to hear his thoughts on what it's like to be a Jewish comic book writer in 2024.
Indeed. Let's take a listen.
Don't take half measures when it comes to home security. Alarms and cameras work, but they'll only tell you that your worst nightmare just came true. Safety Screen by Metalex for windows and doors will keep your family safe and sound with real stopping power. They can't be cut, pried, or bashed in, so you can enjoy carefree ventilation in the spring and fall with peace of mind. And protect your fixed windows and doors with Rock Glass, an absolutely unbreakable clear covering. Call 416-638-2539 or visit metalexsecurity.com to book your free consultation. That's METALEX security.com. Remember, prevention is always better than the cure.
Hey, Ari, welcome to Culturally Jewish. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. How are you doing?
Good, thank you. So for our audiences, can you give us a quick, 30-second summary of Wardens?
Wardens is a comic book set in the 1920s Toronto in an immigrant community called the Ward. This is one of Toronto's first immigrant communities. It's a multicultural community, predominantly at this time Jewish, Chinese, Black, and Italian. This comic features all those communities, but especially focuses on the Jewish community in terms of Rachel Tussman, a Jewish seamstress and down in her luck a woman who has her life turned upside down when her place of work burns to the ground and gives rise to a supernatural menace in the form of the Schmata, a Kabbalistic, magical, possessed clothes as out for bloody revenge for whoever started the fire.
I love it.
Ari, at the same time, I mean, you're a certified nuclear energy worker, and I believe you also have a doctor of philosophy. I think you also have backgrounds in history and physics. So how did you decide to become this comic book writer?
Well, I've been reading comics forever. As a kid, I remember, reading Batman, like at Spider-Man, like the youngest ages. So I've always read comics. Slowly, I've sort of transitioned into, like as I had kids, I started, instead of buying just books, which I bought, normal books, I also bought a ton of comics and they got really into them. So I sort of became more of a comic person almost as I grew up. And I've done a lot of things. I've, overeducated, like, shocking to any Jewish person, background in philosophy and physics and, plays music and all this other stuff. And I don't know, I just sort of like, once I transitioned into machine learning, data science a few years ago, once I realized I wasn't going to be in academia. I was initially going to be in academia for many years. I thought maybe I was going to be a historian or philosopher of science, but I decided after some life evaluations that it was time for something a little different. But doing this sort of technical job left a bit of a creative hole. And I had this story kicking around my head for a few years now. And in 2020, I decided I was out of reasons to not write it. And I just decided to do it. So I decided to just dive in and learn how to write a comic, which is a whole thing. I don't have a background in creative writing prior to this, so I learned on the fly. I wrote a bunch of short stories. I wrote a bunch of longer ones. And, lo and behold, 4 years later, here I am. It's taken a year to get drawn, but finally the first issue of Wardens is out.
Wow. Did you have a mentor throughout this, or were you just scouring through old comic books trying to get the style, and like what was your process?
So writing comics is, like I said, it's a little different, and there's a lot you have to learn specifically about that. I mean, you have to do math, like when you're just writing, the page, even to be how many words are on a page, how many panels per page, like all those things are things you don't have to think about when doing a screenplay, but are sort of unique to comic book writing. So what I did is I actually found a community. I joined, there's a comic writer called Scott Snyder. He wrote Batman for a number of years in the 2010s. And he started a comic class. And so I joined it just on a whim. I just saw that it was happening just online. And there I hooked up with a little community of people who were learning how to write comics and wanted to do this, and sort of, really from like the ground up, people who are like kind of my level, want to get into this and got into this. And now, it's been 3-4 years since we've really started. And some of us are transitioning into learning how to do it, to actually doing it, putting out issues, putting out, series. And yeah, so my goal is to produce at least 2 ongoing series, one set in the past, one set in the present, both Toronto-based stories, and just keep going at it.
You've mentioned Scott Snyder from Batman, but there's also another comic book, Will Eisner's Contract with God. I believe that was like a big inspiration for your writing now in Wardens. Can you give us a brief background on maybe that comic and then what you found so inspiring about it?
Absolutely. Yeah. Contract with God is one of, I think, the most important comics in the history of comics, and certainly one of my favorites. It is the first graphic novel published in the 70s. Will Eisner, who is a comic writer, had been writing newspaper strips and comic books and stuff like that since at least the 40s, maybe earlier. I can't tell you exactly, but he's been doing this for a long time. And so by the time he gets out around to writing a contract with God, he's already told all the stories that, like all the adventure stories, the stories of, he was mostly known for doing The Spirit, who is a crime fighter. So that kind of like, sort of superhero or crime, that thing. But he makes a total different pivot in the 70s where he tells this story that's not serialized in any way, which is different for comics at the time. And it's about this Jewish man whose daughter dies, and he's lost his faith. And he told God, we had a contract, and you broke it. And so he becomes as secular as can be. He sort of gives up religion, and he becomes immensely successful in life. And he realizes at the end of it that something is still missing in his life, and he wants to find a new contract for God, a contract with God. And one of the things I think is perfect about this book in terms of a Jewish cultural work is he goes to these rabbis and he asks them, I need a contract with God. And there's some dispute amongst them. Can we do such a thing? Can we speak for God? And then one of the rabbis says, is not all religion a contract between man and God? Which I think sums up sort of Jewish philosophy in a way that differentiates it from, Christianity, Islam, other major religions, Buddhism, etc., where Judaism it's based on this idea of this contract, this covenant. And this is, I don't know, it's like a Job story. It's like, it's a beautiful story. It's very emotionally compelling. And I think it sums up what it means to be Jewish and the tensions we feel, especially within modern secular Jews, very well. It's over 50 years old, but it pulls out the heartstrings every time I read it.
And so what's your own personal connection with being Jewish? Wardens is obviously a very, very Jewish comic book. There's Yiddish in it. There's Kabbalah. How do you define yourself as a Jew?
So I am culturally Jewish. So I grew up in Montreal. We grew up very secular. I mean, we celebrated a few, holidays, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, sometimes you fast, sometimes you don't, depends who's doing it kind of thing, like that level of Jewish. But I was always very interested in Jewish culture more than like for me, Judaism is not something that I need as a religion to fill a spiritual gap. I don't have that hole in my life. It's something that helps inform kind of the culture. Like my family is very culturally Jewish in terms of sort of all this typical Jewish stereotypes you see in sort of Jewish comedies like Seinfeld, Arrested Development, Curb Enthusiasm, whatever. Like that's my family. My wife.
It's all our families.
Yeah, it is. My wife, who is Chinese, she's a Chinese Canadian from Edmonton. She grew up in Edmonton, and she didn't realize, first of all, that Seinfeld was Jewish, or how Jewish it was until she met my family and met me. And she's like, I get it now. This makes sense. Before I thought it was just kind of funny. These are real people and you are related to them. Yeah.
I just have to interrupt and have to ask, because my partner is Chinese as well too, and he never finds Curb Your Enthusiasm funny at all. He says he doesn't get the humor. Does your partner get the humor?
Oh, she loves it. Yeah. It's It destroys her every time. But yeah, I just want to say, so growing up, I never felt it was weird because my Judaism was sort of less of a central defining cultural identity thing than being an Anglo-Montrealer, because I grew up English in Montreal in the 80s and 90s. So, I mean, that's the split there. Anglo, French versus, separatist, federalist, that kind of thing. So that was sort of how I grew up with the identity. And then I left Montreal and I went to Sackville, New Brunswick, where I did my undergrad in physics, as I mentioned, philosophy of physics as well. And I was the only Jewish person I knew. I mean, the joke is there was 2.5 Jews on campus because there was me and 3 other people who were half Jewish, So, we did Fiddler on the Roof. I was the only Jewish person in Fiddler on the Roof. And so I came back to Montreal during spring break and stuff like that. Not spring break, sorry, for summer break. And I ended up sort of being interested in what I had sort of taken as an assumption of this sort of culture that I come from that everyone must know, because that's just what my family knows. Something that nobody knew. Like people have been like, oh, you're a Jew. What's that like? Not a lot of Jews, I guess, in, Sydney, Nova Scotia. So it made me sort of re-examine this stuff. And I took a course in Yiddish at the time, which I think at McGill in Montreal when I was back for a summer. And that sort of cemented the longstanding interest in Yiddish and sort of the cultural aspects of Judaism, I'd say, more than anything else.
And so how much of that experience of being kind of the lone Jew, the outsider in another place, inform what you're hoping to accomplish with Wardens as a very Jewish comic? Are you hoping that it will inform more people about it in the same way that you were saying your partner was like, oh, I get Seinfeld now, like this is what's happening? Or is it mainly for a Jewish audience or a bit of both?
Wardens is really written for both. I mean, there's a lot of terms and things that Jewish people will get, which are sometimes not explained, but, are common if you look them up. Someone's dying, it's common, in almost all comics, if someone's saying the Shema, they're probably going to die, if a Jewish character is about to die, they will say the Shema, something like that. Like there's things that if you're not in the religion or you don't know of that thing, that doesn't mean anything to you. But if you do, it means something. And then there's a lot of things like the Yiddish where I want to make it as broad and accessible. So I use untranslated Yiddish, but I give the context behind it, where, I'll use a phrase and someone will say a variation of that same phrase back or respond to in a way that you'll understand the words they're using. And if you don't, that's fine. Everyone has a supercomputer in their hands that could look up anything in the world as long as it's in a script they can write. So whatever. Yeah.
I definitely appreciated that about your writing, because sometimes I think people overemphasize trying to explain like blah blah blah. This means this, and I feel like it can water it down a bit. There's a lot more authenticity to just having the actual words there without needing to explain them right back to back.
Thanks. I mean, and that takes a lot of work at editing and careful consideration. It's not something that happens by accident. You have to make it seem that it's natural, but also comprehensible to someone who's outside the target group, which the in references for.
Now, is there anything you mentioned? You're very culturally Jewish, but was there anything when you were researching Wardens in all this time that you said, "Oh, I didn't even know this about the Jewish community or the Chinese community, the Black community in the Ward in Toronto"?
When I started to research this, I knew that there were these communities, but I didn't know much about them. It's totally interesting to me, the fact that there's these various ethnic communities that live basically right next to each other. We're totally fine with each other. Like there's no ethnic strife in the way that there was in many other places. And I mean, this, like, it's one of these examples of like, people just kind of got along in a way that, they came from a lot of places, but I guess one of the things is they probably came from places but didn't have like beef with each other back where they came from. Like it wasn't like, two people who were old enemies then moved into a neighborhood and became, it's like people had nothing really to sort of do with each other, like in terms of their like sort of emotional stories. And so everyone seemed to get along mostly well. There's always like a little bit of tension and stuff, but by and large, the communities were fine. I guess the thing that surprised me the most when I was researching the history of it was the fact that, which is sort of the history of Jewish Toronto in general, where before the massive immigration from the late 19th and early 20th century, most of the Jewish Torontonians were English or British and German, and were more secular, more assimilated, culturally a lot closer to the non-Jewish Torontonians at the time. They're basically, white but Jewish. However, what that even meant in the 1920s, whatever. But like, where the historical immigration into the ward was largely Ashkenazi Jews from Eastern Europe, who were not of the same sort of class, essentially, as the other people. Most of them were very poor. Most of them were, like my ancestors who came to not Toronto, but Montreal and Windsor, didn't arrive with big buckets of money or anything, get off the boat, trying to escape, pogroms in the old country, like, looking for a new job, trying to survive. Sometimes, the dad would come and then send for the wife and the kids later and stuff like that. But it was a different group of people than the Jews were there before. So even within the history of Jewish Toronto, there are like the immigration patterns there's a history to them. It's not just like Jews came then and more Jews came and then more Jews came. It's like you have to look at who's coming, which is similar to the contemporary immigration that's happening with Chinese Torontonians, Chinese Canadians in general. I mean, the people who are coming mostly to China or mostly from China now are a different group of people that came from Hong Kong in the 90s, which are a different group of people that came from, southern China, Canton, around there, the four regions, or I forget the name, back in the day. And it's easy to say, to paint things with a broad brushstroke if you don't know much about it. But once you dig into the history, you realize that just because someone is Jewish or Chinese or whatever, it doesn't mean that they're from the same group of people, the same class of people. It doesn't mean they hold the same values. You have to dig into that a little deeper.
Yeah. So you did all of this research, and how did your idea evolve? So you knew you wanted to do something in Toronto, maybe in that era, or what was like the first draft summary of it, and how did it become what it was now?
Yeah, so this initially came from, I was reading, I think the earliest conception of Wardens, or the earliest thing that was even close to it, it actually came from the villain, the Schmata. So the Schmata is a bunch of possessed clothes. The clothes are all sewn with brachas, and in a moment of desperation, they're arranged to correspond with the Etz Chaim, the tree of life, and Jewish magic, hand wavy, whatever, results in this villain that is essentially a bunch of souls that inhabit these angry clothes. And I kind of wanted something that was like very old school and very tied to the Schmata business, which is something that my family has been in. My great grandfather, when he came from Russia, I'm not exactly sure where in Russia. It says Imperial Russia, which could be a lot of places at the time. He ended up coming to Montreal, and he went into the garment business, and his son did as well before, they closed that business. They opened another thing or whatever. But it's kind of like, I grew up in the Montreal sort of Schmata business, like as a descendant of that. Like when I went to go get clothes, like a sports jacket and pants, like nice clothes, we didn't go to a store. We went to the factory where my dad knew the guy.
I can relate to this.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like,
also in Montreal. Classic story. Anyway, continue.
And there were Schraders at the time,
there were
too,
Schraders.
that my family would take me
That's
to.
right. It was
Yes.
Schraders or like the guy So
Exactly.
I kind of wanted to tell a story that linked into that aspect of stuff. And so once I found the magical hook, and that kind of came to me while I was just reading other stuff, and like the villain came to me first. And then I was like, okay, I've got that. I totally need to like double down on this angle. And, a bit of research. I decided I want to set in the 20s because early on, I wanted to make this a sort of a prohibition story because there was a whole bunch of crime stuff to it, and I wanted to make it all surrounding rum running, speakeasies and stuff like that. I had a good idea for a speakeasy in mind, which I put in the comic, and so that kind of gave it the temporal setting. And then once I started looking into the history of, actually, I don't know when I first heard about the ward, probably from the book The Ward that came out a few years ago, The Life and Loss of Toronto's First Immigrant Neighborhood. Somehow I bumped into that, and I was like, oh, this is the perfect setting for this. And then one thing led to another, and it was like, okay, well, it's a multicultural immigrant neighborhood, so it's not just going to be a Jewish thing, it's going to be a Jewish and Chinese thing. Perfect. I've got this whole other side of my family that's got this expertise in that, cultural domain. And then once the ball gets rolling, there you have it. Story just kind of came.
Now, because of your background in the sciences as well as physics, I would imagine you're dealing with a lot of methodology being very, very accurate. Things have to be precise. How do you square that authenticity with maybe creating something like a supernatural historical fiction? Where's that balance?
It's tough. Research is difficult because on the one hand, you want to do a lot of good in-depth historical research, but on the other hand, it needs to be a character-driven story and not just a dump of here's all the things I learned, because that's not a story. That's just you showing your work. So you have to be very judicious about what you put in there and what you don't. One thing I'm very careful about is language. So, for example, people can have a boyfriend in 1926, but people don't date because the term to date someone predates, or I guess this period predates dating. Like I think the term's from the 40s or something like that. So almost every single term that I could take a moment and be like, okay, let's think about this a moment. Looked up the etymology, saw when its first use was, deciding whether it's going in or not. Like that level of accuracy. But in terms of the story and I mean, there's changes. Like Eaton's, for example, the factory that everybody works at, I called it Stones. It's a different place, but it's basically where Eaton's is. It just replaces that because I wanted to have a Jewish owner of the factory, which adds to a different sort of dynamic and a different type of story than the one you would have if you said people were working at Eaton's, and then you have to be like, okay, how do I be accurate to the history of Eaton's? I can't have one of Eaton's buildings burned down because that never happened, but I can have Stone's building burned down and it's fine. So it's historical fiction. You pick your points where you want to deviate, but you have to stay true to the time and the culture and the language to give that sort of feeling of authenticity, even if your details are different.
And how much involvement did you have in the actual design ideas for the world and the characters?
It's like all the involvement. I worked very closely with the artist, Rob Jennings. Rob is out of New Waterford, Nova Scotia. And he was the only artist of all the people I looked at who was even like close to like on the same page in terms of style and in terms of sort of quality for this comic. And so we worked very closely on the designs, very closely on everything, but yeah, some people, they can just like take an image out of your head and draw it. And he's the closest to that of anyone I've worked with. So it's been amazing.
What do you most enjoy about seeing your story come to life in that world of cartoons, as opposed to if it was a live action film or any other medium that it could have been written in?
I mean, there's a personal joy for me in the sense that I think comics might be my just preferred medium, like in general, like of all the things, TV, movies, like, I love TV, I like movies, music's a whole separate thing. I love music. But in terms of like a story, like comics, like, I don't know why, it's just what I like. So there's a personal satisfaction that comes out of like, I did the thing that I wanted to do, and the thing I want to do is a thing I like a lot. But I think comics work really, really, really well for telling something that is fantastical, something that's supernatural, because you can draw anything. I can have this like weird closed monster thing that's kind of hollow at some points and is always like menacing people with scissors and stuff like that. You know, your imagination's like the limit when it comes to comics. If someone can draw it, that's good enough. You know, this would be great for a cartoon series, but animation is extremely expensive. It takes forever. So, I mean, if anyone picks it up later,
Yeah, well, maybe it'll get picked up.
that would be amazing. One step at a time, I feel, though.
Alana and I were talking before you came on to the chat sort of about the early days of the comic book world, where most of the writers, if not nearly all of them, were Jews. But they were never really writing from a Jewish perspective, right? They sort of couched it in the Supermans and the Spider-Man world. So your story, it's a very Jewy one. What do you think has changed, or do you think things have changed where people now want to read a very specific, a very ethnically specific storyline?
Oh, yeah. Things have changed immensely since, I mean, the first comic was published in 1933 by a Jewish guy. The first superhero in 1939, Superman, 2 Jews, Spider-Man, Stan Lee, Captain America. Like the history of comics, you just start naming people. And if it's, you know, I don't know, even remotely old, they were almost all Jews, except for a lot of the writers who are Italians. And I mean, they're also like just white writers or whatever, artists, but very Jewish. And the culture is very Jewish too, in terms of like Spider-Man's a classic example of a Jewish character who is not Jewish. Spider-Man constantly loses, constantly. He wins all his fights, but he loses like his emotional battles. You know, he loses his girlfriends. He can't hold down the thing. He loses Aunt May. Like every time it's 1 step forward, it's 2 steps back, which is sort of a defining, I don't know, feature of like a lot of Jewish comedy. So like your victories are always tempered with sadness. There's always, you know, it's the breaking the glass at the
Yeah.
temple. It's like you're getting married, but you know, things aren't always great. Keep that in mind, you know. But I mean, at that time, people weren't writing comics for Jews. They were writing comics because this was a cheap medium, and they're just trying to get it out there. They're trying to sell. You know, Stan Lee and Jack Kirby and all those people back in the day were trying to be popular. And, you know, writing a Jewish character is not very popular. Like, first of all, there weren't very many Jews. Second of all, there's the, you know, immense pervasive, like just general anti-Semitism that you have even more so like in the 30s and 40s, like in the US compared to now. I mean, one would assume. I haven't done any studies about anti-Semitism in the US now, but for all the things you hear, it's like, you know, when they launched Captain America, Jack Kirby and Joe Simon, both Jews in like 1940, like people, they were like, you know, like Nazis on the street in New York saying they were going to shut the publications down. And they end up getting a call from, who's the mayor at the time? Jewish guy with the Italian name. Is that the
LaGuardia?
Yeah, LaGuardia.
LaGuardia?
Thank you. Can't believe I forgot that. They got a phone call from LaGuardia saying like, don't worry, I got your guys back. You know, it was like that level of like, it was almost subversive to be like punching Hitler in the face in the 40s in the US. Like, that's the level we're talking about. You're not going to have like, you know, Captain America as a Jew is not going to fly if like that's what you're dealing with, right? So what I feel we're at right now is we're at a different situation where we don't have to write stories. Like, I'm not a starving comic artist like Stan Lee or like Jack Kirby, who's working 13 hours a day just to get a thing out. I'm from a position of sort of historical privilege where a lot of that stuff's been done. Like, comics are big. Those people made comics into an actual like global, you know, medium. Certainly like a North American powerhouse that's responsible for like billions of like, you know, dollars in like IP and stuff. So like, I'm doing like an indie comic, something that's, you know, like reflective and years later, and it's so far distanced from that you can tell these kind of stories. I mean, we're at a point now, I think, in society where people want culturally specific stories, and people get a lot of the generality out of specificity that you didn't really get from, you know, people weren't doing in the 40s, 50s, 60s, 30s, whatever.
So what's the hardest part then of creating a comic book?
The hardest part of creating a comic book, and I shit you not, is getting people interested in your comic book. It's insanely hard to create the thing. It's insanely hard to to sit there and tell the story. It's one thing to like come up with an idea for a story. It's another thing to like turn that into an actual like script where you have, things per page, and then you have to go work with an artist to draw it, and then you have to make sure the artist draws it the way that is, accurate and authentic. And there's a whole negotiation between what they bring to the table and what you would like to see. There's all that. But I mean, right now, the part that's on my mind is like trying to figure out how to get people interested in this like weird indie little thing that is, in this small corner of the world, the comic world, this strange intersection of the history of Toronto and I guess Jewish culture and comics and stuff like that. I mean, in any field, like once you get better at what you do, you will find, it's easier to do it, right? Like I'm way better at seeing how many words on a page, for example, make sense now than I was, 3 years ago when I started. So like that was hard then, but now the hard part is like really just, finding the odd. Yeah, promotion stuff. I mean, I'm a creator. I'm not a promoter at heart, I have to be a promoter because everyone
That's
has.
the problem about being an artist. None of us want to go into it for the business side, but unfortunately, that's the only way to get it to happen.
That's what I've heard from every single person. So yeah.
Well, Ari, one thing you've done is you started a Kickstarter campaign for Wardens,
That's right.
So when did that campaign start? When did it end? What did you learn? What did you learn about running a campaign? And maybe you can even mention some of the rewards you're offering.
Absolutely. So the campaign started January 17th. It is currently ongoing, unless you're listening to this after February 9th. It ended on February the 9th. The campaign is about 43% of the way there. The way Kickstarter campaigns usually work is there's a rush of interest at the beginning, a rush of interest at the end, and then 2 weeks of nothing happening, which makes for an extremely stressful time in the middle, but that's how it is. So for the campaign, you can go to Kickstarter, and if you just search for Wardens, a new supernatural action comic series or something like that, it'll come up. Sure, any number of keywords will get this to hit. But we're offering a digital version, a physical version, some little extra goodies with physical versions, and these little trading cards that I make. I was a big fan of the old Marvel trading cards that they had in the 90s, and so all my comic stuff is these little trading cards with them. We have a little art print, which is an homage to some the Mario 3 art. If anyone, you'll see it. If you know, you know. But the bigger tiers that I think people might be interested in is our artists will do a sketch of people in a 1920s sort of style, a caricature, which is great. And the biggest one is you can get drawn into an issue of Wardens 2. It's sort of a cameo tier. So I strongly encourage people to check those out. If you are at all interested in having yourself be in a comic, then I by all means, come one, come all. We would love to put you in. And even if you just want to read a comic, if you just want to know a thing exists, or even if you just want to back it, it's not for you to read, but you just like the idea, I'll take all comers. But I will still send you a digital copy, even if you say don't send me one, because I want more people to read it, or at least to be able to send it on to someone else to read it. I'm a big fan of sharing.
Becoming a character in the next edition of Wardens definitely piqued my interest. I was like, oh, maybe David will appear if I spend enough money on it.
If you spend enough money, you definitely will appear. I guarantee you that.
Thank you so much, Ari, for sharing all of your comic book wisdom. I look forward to all of our listeners getting a copy of Wardens.
Thank you so much.
So, David, you're in the new play. Tell me about that.
I am. We just started rehearsals 2 days ago, and it's called The Black Bonspiel of Wooly McCrimmon. Alana, do you know?
Bonspiel?
I was going to ask if
like
you knew.
like Yiddish, like spiel?
It's a curling tournament, and it consists of several games. They're usually like held on a weekend. So basically this story, and I don't know if you know the playwright W.O. Mitchell.
I don't.
Okay, very famous sort of Western Canadian playwright of like the 50s style. So this is a very Canadian play. It's set in Alberta, and basically it's a retelling of the Faustian bargain, where this guy Wooly makes a deal with the devil that he's willing to sell his soul in order to win this big Bonspiel tournament. And a lot of it's about the local community. It's about this curling match. We get to curl on stage, and I happen to play Judas Iscariot.
Okay, before we get into that, how's your curling? Or are you starting to practice now?
Okay, so I had never curled before this show, and then one of my colleagues who's also in the show with me decided we're going to take a lesson. So we went to the Calgary Curling Club. We spent 2 hours on the ice. We learned all the lingo. We learned how to sweep and all that hard kind of expression going on. But it turns out on our first day of rehearsal, because this play is set in the 30s, all that goes out the window. Any kind of proper 21st century technique, how you move, how you stretch is kind of out the window. So we're dealing with brooms and sweeping. That's very much like you just take it almost like you're bowling and you log the rock, down to the other side of the ice.
And you're playing Judas Iscariot. Please expand.
Why would Judas Iscariot be in a show in Canada in the 1930s about a Bond spiel? Well, basically, the devil, I'm playing for the devil's team. So the devil brings up on their side, we've got Lizzie Borden, we've got Macbeth, and you've got Judas Iscariot. And I'm sure some people are like, that's kind of weird. But, when W.O. was writing this play, obviously Judas in good Christian folklore or in the Bible, Judas is the villain, right? The bad guy. So he is playing for the devil's team. And when I was approached to maybe if I was interested in playing this, I had to give it a second thought. How would me, being a Jewish actor, want to or would be willing to play this character that is normally doesn't have the best reputation in the Jewish community. And a lot of Christians have blamed Judas and thus the Jewish community for the killing of Christ. So I had to take a hot second before taking on this role, but said, well, you know what? I think I'm going to reinvent this role to make Judas more sympathetic, let's say.
Well, you'll have to keep us posted on your curling and your well-rounded character building.
Thank you. I will definitely do that. So what's on the docket for next month? What is happening across Canada?
So this isn't Canadian, but I thought it was important to mention that a Jewish Holocaust movie is nominated for an Oscar. It's called The Zone of Interest. It's about the commandant of Auschwitz and his wife who strive to build a dream life for their family in a house and garden next to the camp. I personally have a hard time watching a lot of Holocaust content, but if you're the type of person who can stomach that or is interested, I highly recommend you checking it out. David, how about you?
Thank you, Elena. So going on in my neck of the woods at Temple B'nai Tikva, it's an online event. They are inviting Steve Marcus, who is an artist, illustrator, and pop culture innovator on January 31st, 7 p.m. Alberta time. But as I said, it'll be 9 p.m. Eastern, and it is online. And basically, Steve is going to weave his childhood memories of, let's say, bagels and pickles from the barrel, along with his journey of passion for his roots and culture. It should be an interesting event to check out online.
Nice.
Back over to you.
There is a book that I want to shout out. It's not out till March, but she just announced it yesterday, so I know the author. Her name is Sivan Slapak. She runs the Jewish Arts Mentorship Program that I did last year at the Siegel Center, and she's a writer. Her book is called Here is Still Here, and you can pre-order it now. It's on Indigo. This is the synopsis. Raised in a family of post-war Jewish refugees in Canada, Isabel feels displaced from an early age. She's searching for love, purpose, and the true meaning of home. From Montreal to Jerusalem and back again, she navigates checkpoints and borders, home and exile, milestones and disappointment, love and loss. So this is Sivan's first publication, and I really wanted to shout that out. So be sure to pre-order Here is Still Here by Sivan Slapak.
I know Sivan not very well, but I did not know she was a writer as well, so this is very exciting to hear. And over in Toronto, we've got Funny Jews. Funny Jews is a stand-up comedy show that's going to bring together the brightest and funniest Jewish comedians for a night of side-splitting, humor, kvetching, and maybe even a little guilt. It is happening February 4th at 8 p.m. at the Prosserman JCC. It is in partnership with a Cultura Collective membership. As I said, 8 p.m. February 4th. If you're in Toronto, check it out with headliners featuring Brandon Sobel, Tamara Chevon, and headliner Elon Altman.
Also, be sure to donate to Ari's campaign for his book. We'll put the link in the show notes, and there's a whole bunch of different prizes you can get depending on how much you donate. I think I'm going to buy a copy to support, so be sure to check that out. David, I just realized that I didn't ask you at all about your trip to Hawaii. How was that?
The weather was fantastic. I don't know if you've ever been.
I have not. So I would love to go, though.
Yeah, it's great. It's 25 degrees every single day. It's gentle breezes. The people are very laid back and relaxed over there. So my mom and I, we took a tour of most of the island. We sat on the beach. We had some ramen noodles. And we just sort of took in the atmosphere and the people. There's lots of shopping over there. We were in Honolulu for the majority of the time. So it was really great to get away. Unfortunately, being Canada what it is, it was -40 in Calgary before we left. And
oh my God.
we had to deal with flight delays and flight cancellations, both to and from there. There is something, even after the pandemic, like we are not back to where we are in Canada in terms of WestJet or Air Canada. So shame on them.
I feel like I heard something on the radio about the threat of blackouts in Calgary. That was Calgary, right? Because the weather was so cold that they had to make sure that the whole city didn't lose power.
That is exactly right. So like it was -40, as I said, but it felt like -50. People were very
nuts.
It was nuts. Like everyone's like, stay indoors. You cannot go outside.
Yeah.
It is dangerous
I heard
to spend
that.
more than 2 minutes outside. And that's when we were supposed to leave to Hawaii. And my mom's flight sadly got canceled from Montreal to Calgary. So we had to scramble very last minute to get her a flight the next day, or we would not have made the trip at all.
It's not even that cold in Montreal.
I know.
It's like the weather got really cold and now it's back to like 0. Who knows? Global warming. Anyway, I'm glad you had a nice time and looking forward to more interviews with you on the show now that you're back.
Thank you, Alana. This has been great, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks. Culturally Jewish is hosted by me, David Sklar, and
Ilana Zakon.
We're produced and edited by Michael Freeman, and our theme music is by Sarah Siegel-Lazar. We're a member of the CJN Podcast Network. To support our work and everything the CJN does, visit thecjn.ca/donate to make a monthly donation and receive a charitable tax receipt.
Thanks so much for listening, and see you next time.